Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Meredith Bell. No matter what leadership role you have in your organization, what you and your team do on a daily basis affects your customers, either directly or indirectly. So my question for you to consider is, do you have systems in place for tracking and managing the customer experience as well as your employees' experiences? If you don't, you're in for a treat today because my guest is an expert in the area of customer experience, which is also known by the letters CX. His name is Michael Hinshaw. Welcome to my show, Michael.
Thanks, Meredith. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, I am so excited because this is a topic that, I think we've covered only peripherally in the past, and I'm so delighted to have your expertise with us today. And I want to share a little bit about your background so people understand who you really are in this area and why what you have to share is so valuable. Michael is the founder and president of a customer experience consultancy called McorpCX, and he's been recognized on more than a dozen lists of top global CX influencers. He's consulted for and advised executives at companies such as Intel, Microsoft, Biogen, Best Buy, and lululemon. Michael is the co-author of the best-selling book, Smart Customers, Stupid Companies, and he has a new book out, co-authored with Diane Magers, called Experience Rules, the Experience Operating System, XOS, and 8 keys to enable it. We're going to talk about a few of these keys today, and I want to encourage you to get a copy of his book to learn about all the others because they're essential and really valuable. So, Michael, to get our conversation started, I would love to have you share a little bit about what got you interested in the first place in this whole area of customer experience.
Well, it's interesting because customer experience as a business discipline is young enough that most people come into it from directions that are, I'll say, non-standard, right? There's no one path to become a customer experience expert. Quite frankly, no more than there's one path to become a CEO or a company leader or a leader in a company. And my background is in marketing. I have a master's degree in design, and I did a lot of work for private equity and venture capital firms in the late 90s. And I sold the firm that I had started in a marketing strategy firm. And while I was waiting to figure out what I was doing next, I took a year off, or I expected to. And a private equity firm that we had done work with asked me if I wanted to get involved in the internet. They said, "We think this is an interesting area to invest in. Would you like to run a company for us?" And I said, "Sure." So long story short, we came up with an idea for grain trading in Canada. And as I mentioned before, my background's in marketing. I live in San Francisco. I don't know much about Canada other than skiing in Whistler, or didn't at the time, and don't know much about grain trading. In fact, absolutely nothing. So what I had to learn to succeed in that market, which we did, we grew the largest independent grain trader in Canada with over 100,000 acres of wheat under management, is I figured I need to talk to everybody. So I talked to farmers and my leadership team. I was hiring people in the process, figure out what we're going to do. And we talked to farmers, we talked to agronomists, we talked to grain traders, and we talked to buyers of grain, and we built what we call the customer relationship lifecycle, which essentially is the same as a journey map. If a journey map is, or a customer journey is a phrase that any of your listeners are familiar with, it charts from start to finish, awareness through to advocacy, the relationship that a customer or an individual has with a journey. And oftentimes those journeys are with brands. In the context of a startup, It's what are they trying to accomplish and where do they have friction in the process? So long story short, we identified many friction points, built a business that eliminated several of them, particularly the high value ones. And I used that background as the jumping off point for McorpCX, which is our customer experience consulting firm. And I joke that I spent the first 10 years talking about customer experience, why it was important, explaining what it is. And the last 10 years trying to help people understand what is and isn't customer experience, because customer experience has become such a significant topic in virtually every organization we work in. And it covers so much.
Well, thank you. That's such an interesting journey to get to where, you are today. And I'm just curious because I know there's been kind of an explosion of positions in organizations around this experience. They're often called chief customer officer or experience officer. There are all kinds of titles, but it seems like the number of people that are moving into these kinds of positions is really growing. So is that a reflection of the interest in or the realization maybe of how important it is to really map that customer journey?
Yeah, and the short answer is yes, absolutely. It's recognition that managing customer experience is very important. And I say managing purposefully because customer experience, I mean, that's the phrase that most people use to describe the discipline of customer experience, but customer experience lives between people's ears.
Mm.
It's not something that you can package. It's not something that you can sell. It's perceptual. So the experience is whatever your customers or whatever we as customers feel. So it's emotional. We're human creatures. We experience things. We respond with feelings. But what organizations can do is they can put systems in place to manage the experiences our customers have, which then changes the feelings that they have as a result. And as you change customer feelings, you change their behaviors. If customers feel bad about the experience and they dislike the organization because of it, they're going to leave. If they feel good, they're going to stay, potentially spend more, increase their lifetime value, et cetera. So that distinction is something that I just think is worth calling out.
Yes. And as I'm listening to you to describe that, I'm also thinking about leaders who may not be in positions where they directly interface or their team doesn't directly interface with customers. So there are two thoughts that I've got, and you can choose which one you want to do first. The first is around the other thing I was thinking is I heard you describe that the employee experience is so similar to that.
Yes.
We come to work, depending on what we encounter, we have emotions about it. And so that impacts our decision about how much to really commit to that organization. What do you see as some of the parallels with customer experience and employee experience?
Well, we shorthand it by saying happy employees equal happy customers, simplistically. And just statistically, organizations with more engaged employees have significantly higher rates of customer satisfaction. They also perform better, higher revenue and net profit compared to competitors. For example, there are many other metrics as well. But to your specific point, the employee experience can and should be managed very much like the customer experience. How do you onboard new employees? How do you find new employees? How do you have an organization that is attractive to the kinds of employees you want to have? How do you help those employees through their career paths in ways that maximize their abilities and their ability to contribute value to the organization? And then how at such point in time as the relationship, doesn't work for either the employer or the employee, how do you help to, offboard those employees in ways that are beneficial to you and to them and create a longstanding bond? And we've seen, of course, corporations behave poorly in that regard. We've also seen, but we don't hear as much about, corporations do a really good job parting ways with employees, and those employees remain loyal to the brand of their prior employer.
That is such a critical point, and something that I think you're absolutely right, that not enough organizations give thought to how someone leaves the organization. And it's similar with customers, I think, even though somebody may decide to no longer do business with you, the way you let them go or the way you follow up or don't follow up afterwards will either leave a real sour taste in their mouth or cause them to even say good things about you, even though they're not doing business with you anymore. Do you find that to be the case?
Yeah, on both counts, customers and employees. There's, broadly speaking, there's a phrase used of positive attrition, which means customers, employees that you don't necessarily want to keep. How do you manage positive attrition in a way that those who leave are advocates for your brand in one way or another, right? Or to the degree possible, ensure that they have the highest likelihood of becoming advocates. And negative attrition is in customers that you don't want to leave and employees that you don't want to leave. And I use attrition also mindfully because it's really hard to find great employees. It's really hard to get great customers. It's much easier to keep them. It's less expensive, it's more efficient, drives greater value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the experience itself, both of the relationship overall, as well as what happens if and when things fall apart, has everything to do with the net effect of positive and negative attrition on your brand.
Important point. Thank you for bringing that up. And the other piece that I wanted to ask about, I think, is tied into your first key, which is around strategy, because it's this whole idea of how do you get leaders and teams that don't directly interact with customers on board with this whole employee experience or customer experience strategy.
Yeah. And so what you're referring to is, in our book, we talk about the 8 keys to managing customer experience. We call it the experience operating system. And the first one, and one of the most important, is strategy. And it's actually strategy and vision, right? So we interact with many executives that say we want to be more customer centric, but without clarity on what that means to leadership, and without leadership's ability to translate that clarity into what it means to the rest of the organization, it's hard to move forward. At least to move forward in a way that everyone comes along. Mm-hmm. And so, as I think about your question around employees, including leaders that may or may not interact directly with customers, and those who don't, we broadly see there's 3 categories of individuals in a company as it relates to customers. One is those who have direct interaction with the customers on an ongoing basis. It might be sales, which could be in store, for example. It might be sales folks over the phone, customer support, customer success, direct interaction with customers, obviously. The second class of, or type, I should say, not second class, the second type of employees are those who don't directly interact with customers, but whose jobs do directly influence the customers and the customer experience. So think of marketing as an example. Another area you might think about is product design, product development, innovation. Those are all things that directly affect the customer experience, even though the individuals in those roles aren't interacting with customers on a day-to-day basis. They might be interacting with the customers to figure out how do they design products that customers love, but that's different than the day-to-day. And the third category is employees that don't interact with customers at all on a day-to-day basis. Think about bookkeeping or legal. There's a couple examples of that. And it's obvious to most leaders that those employees who interact with customers every day, that they need to figure out, they need to do a better job on the experience. They need to be more empathetic. They need to find ways to better connect with customers. And instinctively, those who are designing experiences also have a mental model for how they can improve experience, but it's often not tied to an overall vision. It's related to their specific area, like web design or mobile app design or user experience, product development, et cetera. The strategy piece lets you link directly to that. And the third group of employees, those who don't interact with customers at all, the reality is that folks in legal or HR do have a significant impact on the experience. Have you ever gotten a bill, by the way, from a company that you didn't understand or was less than entirely clear?
Of course.
I get those all the time. Or a contract or an agreement that you read and you're like, what are they asking me to do? What's my responsibility? Right. Those are just two examples of ways that, I'll say back office staff really have a significant impact on the customer without actually interacting with the customer on a day-to-day basis. We worked with an insurance company who the marketing department was doing a great job getting people signed up for insurance. But the target audience that they're going after was a slightly, I'll say socioeconomic, wasn't, the folks who are getting $10 million life insurance policies. These are individuals who are looking for, salary replacement or disability, things of that nature. And they had a really good sign-up rate, but the policy didn't actually start, for obvious reasons, until the first check was received. And they had a horrible conversion rate. People who signed up said, yes, we want this insurance, and then who didn't pay. And it turns out that the billing options, which were dictated by the system that did billing in this insurance company, were so limited and inflexible that the majority of individuals who, they budget on a weekly basis, say, I know that on the 15th, I'm going to get my check and my $30 payment's going to go out on the 15th. And I'm going to manage it that way. Well, the billing system was like, we only send out invoices once a month and it's on the 9th, for example. So the lack of flexibility meant that the people who wanted to buy the policies couldn't buy it on their terms. By switching that, they unleashed a flood of new business because people were signing up for it, and then they were actually paying because the payment system was changed to match the experience that they needed. Win-win.
Great story. And, it makes me think about all these touch points. Where is the customer touched in a given moment where they could form an impression about the company? And so when you take that analysis, and I'm sure that's part of the overall system that you create, is having organizations identify where are these points, and are they pain points or joy points or whatever you might want to call them when the customer has this particular interaction with the company.
Yeah. And you consider that every single interaction that a customer has with a brand, whether direct or indirect, when I say direct, meaning, making a phone call, visiting a website, indirect, hearing about it from a friend, every one of those touch points creates impression. And it's an experience. And so people respond to individual touch points in very specific ways.
And the whole thing of it triggering or being centered around emotions that we have, and recognizing we're emotional beings. And so to underestimate the power of bringing out good feelings instead of negative feelings. Can you give an example of a company that, you just did as far as their return and increase in business, but on the emotional side, can you think of some companies that went from kind of indifferent, let's say, customers to those that were really excited about doing business with that company?
So I have many examples of that, but I think I might pivot slightly and answer with a company that, I have personal interactions with, that is purpose built to drive passion with its customers. And that's Patagonia, right? It's an outdoor company. They sell jackets, they sell all kinds of things for the outdoors, climbing ropes, you name it. And what Patagonia does is understand who their customers are exceedingly well. They also have a very clear mission. They have a clear strategy. They have a clear vision around the kind of company they are and what that means to people in the company. And so they do things like they will purchase your Patagonia products back so you don't throw them away if you've used them and you want new products. And you can actually buy used products of Patagonia because one of Patagonia's values is, we want to be environmentally conscious, and throwing away a serviceable down jacket, for example, is not something that falls within that vision or that mission. And so their design of products, their ability to interact with customers, where their customers live, and connecting with their customers emotionally, is something that Patagonia and many other companies do exceedingly well. But if you ever purchased or repurchased products from Patagonia, I'll give an example of a company that does that well.
That's great. One of the other things that I know you address in your book, and I would love for you to talk about, is this whole idea of breaking down silos where people are, used to working in their own area. And this whole idea of putting a strategy in place where we're looking across the entire organization
Yeah.
instead of our individual units. How do you go about guiding, or what would you suggest to a listener who says, wow, I'd like to see us do this in our company, but how do I pull together all these separate units?
Yeah. Well, I semi-jokingly say that improving customer experience and becoming more customer-centric and experience-led is not simple, but it can be straightforward. When I say, not simple, part of the straightforward thing you need to do is to help the organization work, across silos.
Mhm.
Like, that's easy to articulate, it's hard to actually make happen. There are tools that customer experience professionals use to help facilitate that. One of the most common, which I mentioned earlier, is a customer journey or journey map. And building a map of the customer journey that shows how your customers interact across their journey to accomplish a goal, as well as the different parts of the organization they interact with and what touch points they have and how those touch points make them feel. It allows people across the organization to come together and coalesce around improving that customer's journey. And usually the friction points in a journey get articulated or show up, I should say, when there's handoffs, right? From one department to another, from marketing to sales, from sales to service, or sales to onboarding, onboarding to service. And that's just, one example, but finding a way to bring people from every one of the organizations that the customer touches, and then having those folks work together to essentially smooth that journey out, identify and eliminate friction. One of the beauties of working cross-organizationally with the customer at the center of decision-making is that it's not about, my department. It's about how do we serve the customer. So it's not accusatory. It's not, marketing, you screwed up. You made promises we can't keep. It's like, hey, marketing, these are some of the expectations our customers have. How does marketing work with sales to seamlessly make that transition in ways that align with customers' expectations and make the experience frictionless and seamless for them, no matter what channel they interact with, no matter what part of the organization they interact with?
Yes. And you also, I believe, put together some councils of people that represent cross sections of an organization.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about the kinds of councils that you put together and the purpose that they have.
So customer councils take different forms inside organizations. And broadly speaking, there's external customer councils, which are actually customers that you can, talk to, query. They're sometimes known as communities, but that external customer council is a group of customers that you as a company turn to basically reality check your assumptions. We did this thing for you. Do you like it? What do you think? Or we're thinking about doing this thing for you. What do you think? And customers who are on those councils or in those positions are really good about giving honest feedback. And it helps to guide the organization. So you have kind of an on-call group of customers who have invested interest in helping you serve them better. I think the councils that you were referring to are the internal, what we call internal customer councils. And those fall more under kind of a governance, alignment, accountability rubric, so to speak. And a leaders council is one of two common councils inside a company. And leaders council, typically there's an executive sponsor for CX. It might be rarely that executive sponsor is rarely the CEO. The CEO is the all up, or the president, the all up sponsor of everything CX. But there's somebody, SVP, VP, CMO, CCO, somebody whose job it is to be executive sponsor of customer experience in the organization. And there's a cross-functional group, just as you described earlier. You might have legal, marketing, sales, et cetera, finance leaders across the organization who sit on this council. And the job of that council is to make decisions about priorities for the organization, related to customer experience. We're going to do these 4 things. We're not going to do those 4 things. And this is why. There's a framework around that, kind of a decisioning criteria that they use so that there's transparency around it. And one of the reasons that's important is if the CEO says, we're going to be customer centric, and decisions are made in ways that don't make sense to employees, it's like, oh yeah, that's just something that's happening up at the exec, that's in the leadership team. That doesn't really matter to us. But with transparency and communication around what the criteria are, the broader organization starts to see, oh, okay, this is important for these reasons. And these things aren't not important, but they're not as important as these, and here's why. And so the job of that leadership council is to really serve as the sponsor for helping to budget for and helping to prioritize the bigger initiatives that organizations do. There's a secondary group, and I say secondary not because it's less important, but because it's not as high in the organization typically, and that's the customer champions or champions council. There's lots of different words that are used to describe that, but essentially it's a cross-functional team. There's members across the organization. It's the people in every company that love customers and are passionate about making lives better for customers and for employees. And that group within their divisions, their teams, their units, they identify things that they think need to be fixed. And they, again, following a different set of decision criteria, they push that to another part of the organization saying, hey, we need to fix these things. Some of them will be fixed right there by that group. Some things might be fixed by the customer experience team. Big problems like, turns out, for example, our call center reps have to interact with 9 different systems to give 50% of our customers the answers they want. It's like 9 systems? You're kidding. That's got to go up to the experience council or to the leadership council because that's a big investment, a huge system change. And that champions network serves as not only that first filter for finding things, they also serve as essentially experience ambassadors and advocates. And to a significant degree, mentors and trainers, helping people around them understand what customer experience is, why it's important, and how everyone in the organization can coalesce to deliver a better experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, each one of those, I can see how they need to communicate between those 2 groups that are internal, need to communicate to each other regularly. Do you ever have overlap of membership of one to the other, or they just have ways typically, of staying in touch?
Yeah, typically not. There's whatever body manages customer experience internally, whether it's the CX team or it might be, it typically is a CX team, although the CX team is oftentimes only a handful of people, even big companies. But that CX team works with the champions network on a day-to-day basis or ongoing basis. And then they report up to, and they filter the requests up to that leadership network level. We've seen champions network members, warehousemen, bookkeepers, frontline office staff, managers of stores, marketing leaders, pretty broadly across the organization. You can find people who are passionate about serving customers better anywhere. And there's a lot of them. But giving them a voice and a framework and a mission to do that, this is going to be a bad analogy. It's like a good infection, right? Mm-hmm. And because when the word starts to spread and people start telling stories about, oh my gosh, we did this one thing over here, like the billing. We increased our revenue for this product in this group by 40% over this period of time by fixing this one thing. That's amazing. What can we do over here? And it starts to get people excited about what they can do. And it starts to get people focused on what customers need and what customers' experiences are.
It's interesting as I'm hearing you describe that, the impact on the employee experience is positively impacted by the willingness for the organization, the leadership, to put together these different councils or whatever the structure might be that gives a voice, as you said, to people. And that goes such a long way to people feeling they matter. I think that's the essence of what we're talking about here, Michael, this idea that customers want to feel they matter. and employees want to feel they matter,
Yeah.
that
We all
they
do.
are seen, they are noticed, they are cared about.
Yeah, and they have a voice.
Mm-hmm.
And a big part of that is the ability to have that voice heard. And that's for both customers and for employees. I'm sure that, as a customer, you receive countless surveys. Hey, how'd we do? And, our company is responsible for sending some of those, I'm sure. But ultimately, if the organization doesn't take the information from customers and use that to make the experience better, customers get disenchanted. The same with employees, right? If you're talking to your employees about what the experiences are that they have, or where they see gaps, where they see opportunities, and they don't see the organization doing things to improve it, then they become disenchanted and disengaged. And disenchanted, disengaged employees are not good for, it's not good for the employees themselves, and it's also not good for the organization.
Customers, because like you said early on, happy employees equals happy customers.
Yes.
And the opposite is, I would think, also the case. If employees are disgruntled or frustrated or having negative emotions, that's going to have an impact on the people who are doing business with them.
Yeah, I gave a speech at the Business Marketing Association's annual conference a number of years ago, and it was on customer experience. And there was a Q&A session after the speech, and one of the questions asked was, we're in a business to business role, right? We're not a consumer company, so customer experience doesn't really apply to us. And I said, okay, that's great. So let me just ask all of you a question. Anybody in here who is successfully able to leave your emotions at home when you go to work? Raise your hand. And of course, nobody did, right? Because none of us leave our emotions at home. They go with us everywhere, whether we like it or not. And so I use that just as an example to say that in a business environment, it's just as critical to have a focus on customer experience as it is in the consumer environment. And even in B2B, the buying process is more complex. The contracting process is more complex. There's more people involved in the decision process to become a customer or to stop becoming a customer. What's really interesting is that in the business to consumer market, after a single bad experience, about 90% of customers will leave. It's like even in many cases, brands that they have a prior positive relationship with. And that's just a bad experience that was not caught and recovered by the company. So they'll go away. In the B2B space, it's closer to 60%. Different studies show 50 to 60% of B2B customers will leave after a bad experience. And the reason for that is it's easy for consumers to leave. Just can go buy a shirt someplace else, or open a bank account somewhere else. But for business customers, it's harder because there's more people in the decision-making process. So the interesting flip on that is that something like 60% of consumers who leave will tell others about that negative experience. On the B2B side, 90% of B2B customers will tell their peers and others about a negative experience. And then those numbers are plus or minus correct, and I say this, my statistics and my math is always directionally correct. It may not be precise. So just full disclosure.
But it's a profound number.
Yes.
It's a profound statistic. Even if it were just 85, it's still huge when you think about that. And I had an executive I was talking to recently who was getting ready to go to a conference of her peers. And she said, one of the things we do is we compare notes about the vendors we work with.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
we're not there to necessarily badmouth them, but we're there to share successes, the ones we really love doing business with, but also to, give warnings about these others that aren't positive experiences and that we don't recommend. So yes, people talk, whether it's formalized or, in a group or one-on-one conversation. So Michael, recognizing how important this whole aspect of being aware of and managing customer experience for a company that maybe has not consciously been focused on that, what would be your recommendation for like a step they could take to move in that direction?
Yeah. So I think the first, broadly, education is important. The more we know, the better we're able to process and respond to whatever's there. And so I'd suggest that the executive team, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the CEO and the board of directors, but there should be an activity amongst leadership to really understand what customer experience is broadly, to determine whether or not that is in fact something that makes sense for their organization to pursue. I would argue, of course, that every company should do this, but there are oftentimes business reasons or other reasons why companies don't make that a priority.
Yeah.
But even if you don't make it, even if it's not your number one thing, and for something like, I think 70% of executives said the customer experience is one of their highest priorities in the next 3 years, like the top 3 strategic objectives. Even if it's not your number one priority, it's still critical to get right, because if you tick customers off, you're going to lose them. Simplistically, you upset employees, you're going to lose them. So that's the first thing. It's just educate yourself, read books, listen to podcasts, read reports. There's a lot out there. The second thing, and this is across the organization broadly, it's hard to know how to improve customer experience or how well you're doing at delivering customer experience if you don't know the experiences your customers have. So I'll go back to the example, right? How I started in customer experience was talking to people and finding out where they were happy and where they were unhappy, what was working, what wasn't working. And an ability to gather, analyze, and take action on customer feedback is really the core function of most customer experience teams in most organizations. There's many other things they do besides that, but the ability to, conduct those surveys, to stand up and interact with those external customer councils, the ability to look at telemetry data, what's your web traffic like? Where are people dropping out of your journey or your buying cycle? Why are they doing those things? Understanding what's happening to their customers today is the first step towards changing what's happening to your customers tomorrow.
Those are great first steps. And there's so much more I know that is in your book. In fact, your book, Experience Rules, is a wonderful place, I think, for them to start, because you have these 8 keys. And we've only had time to just touch on, a little sprinkling of those. And so I highly recommend that everybody that's really interested, and who isn't, when you think about it, Michael, everyone has customers. It's the only way we are in business, if we have people buying what we're selling.
There is that.
And so no matter what kind of profession you are in or business you run, it's critical to know what are people thinking. So as we wrap up, I would love for you to share, how can people connect with you, get a copy of your book, and learn more about the services that you provide?
Yeah. So thank you very much, Meredith. It's been a delight chatting with you. And company is McorpCX. We're online at mcorp.cx, so mcorp.cx. I'm on LinkedIn, Michael Hinshaw, pretty easy to find. And the book itself, Experience Rules, you can go on Amazon, just type in Experience Rules, and either my last name, Hinshaw, Hinshaw, or Diane Magers, Magers, and we'll pop up. We're just releasing now, and we're actually already #1 bestseller in the service category on Amazon. So, and we haven't launched yet. So I know when your readers get this, we will have just officially launched, and hopefully we'll be continuing this trajectory. So
that's wonderful.
Also happy for any questions that any of your listeners have. Ping me on LinkedIn, just mention Meredith, and I'll be sure to get back to you. I love having conversations about this, and just happy to chat, provide support, help in any way that I can.
I want to encourage my listeners to take advantage of that offer, Michael, because your depth of knowledge, understanding, experience in this whole topic of customer experience is so deep. We've just, barely scratched the surface of it in our conversation today. And there's so much that companies can do to really up-level that experience that their customers have with their company. And I want to encourage them to do that. And thank you for your commitment over the years to this whole area. It's so critical when you think about happy employees equals happy customers. When people implement the strategies and the counsels and the other elements of your keys, what happens is they create happier organizations with happier people, and it's a ripple effect with their customers and anyone who comes in contact with the company. So thank you for your work in this area that's making such a difference with so many lives.
Thanks so much, Meredith.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free Facilitator Guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.